So our last card here is an anemone card. I think that's how you say it. It's my guess that that's what this flower is. I know the other ones very well. This one I'm not absolutely sure, so I'm just guessing. So very first step is we're going to put some blue on that background. And once again, I'm not trying to make it completely solid blue. I'm just adding a hint of a suggestion of a sky, a little bit of interest back there. Now, because of the resins and stuff in this ink, I need to heat set it before we move on to the next step. We're going to be doing some heat embossing, and if I don't heat set this, when I put the embossing powder on, it's going to stick to this whole back. So here we go. Might be overkill, that might not be, but it's good for right now. So I'm going to put my stencil where I want it. I need to tape it in place again for this one because I don't want it to move while I am applying my ink, and I also want to make sure, one second, I just didn't have those flowers centered. There we go. I also want to make sure that any area that I don't want ink in is covered. So tiny bit up there that we want to cover. So I'm going to be inking with it's called Shaded Lilac. It's a light purple. My embossing powders are darker than this, but I want a light base for them to go on, and I also don't want my flowers to get too dark. So for both layers, I'm going to use this same color purple. There we go. And we can pull this off and grab my powder. I should have had them out already. So there we go. And a scrap piece of paper underneath. Don't have to worry about being too, worry about taking too much of the embossing powder out, because anything that goes onto my scrap piece of paper here goes right back into the bottle, so there's no waste. Let's close that up and then melt this powder. There we go. Now we're going to repeat. Well, not really repeat. We're going to stencil the next layer onto the flower. We're going to use that same color of ink, matching them up. And again, it's super easy to see exactly where the edges of those flowers are to know where to ink up. Make sure we don't get our stems in there. Now this particular stencil does have stems, and I use them for my card here, but they're really hard to line up for this one. This part, the bottom part, wasn't hard to line up, but the extra ones that they give are a little bit harder to line up. So for this card, I'm actually just going to use a paintbrush and a re-inker to put the ink down for the stems, and I think we're going to get a little bit more of a natural look. So same color ink. Basically this ink is just applying, like, we're not necessarily going to see the color because we're using a different color embossing glaze, but it's just applying the moisture for that ink to, or that glaze to stick to. And embossing glaze is actually transparent, so you get to see a little bit of the things underneath. So there's a little bit of the blue from the sky, so it just makes it a little bit more interesting in my opinion. There we go. And you can see I'm using a different brush than my regular brushes for these. And the main reason is this is a dye pigment blend, and you can use your other brushes for them, but you need to completely wash them out before you use them with regular distress ink. Otherwise you're going to contaminate your pads. So I didn't want to have to worry about that during the class, so I just grabbed different brushes. But it washes out really, really easy. The thing that takes the longest is waiting for the ink on your brush to completely dry. All right, let's melt the layer. Now you may or may not be able to see there is some embossing powder there and there. I could have brushed it off with a dry brush, but because on the card I'm going to add some splatters to the black background, I think that just adds to it, so I left it there. So I'm just gonna go grab my re-inker and I'll be back to you. All right, I have my re-inker. Had a little mishap when I was shaking it up. I guess the lid wasn't quite on it as well as it should have been, but hopefully we've got that cleaned up. So I'm just taking that liner brush that I used for the stems for the last card, for the poppy card, and I'm just going to use that. And by using this brush, I can kind of decide where I want those stems to go. And then it just gives it a little bit more of a natural look rather than being stuck with where the stencil had the stem placement. And then tap the excess off. Let's melt that. And there we go. This just needs to be cleaned off quickly, and then we'll go to the next step. So some of these stencils, especially the ones that have an area that is solid, also come with those pieces that were cut out. So I've got those pieces here. I'm going to lay them on top of, I'm going to figure out which one goes on top of which one and lay it on top. Oh, I've got a wrong one there, that's why. And we're going to use these as masks, and then I'm going to spray on top of, I'm going to put the splatters on top of my flowers. I got to find the other mask. All right, my other mask has completely vanished, and I'm sure I'm going to find it sitting somewhere here in plain sight, but let's carry on. So I've got some Oxide Sprays here. I'm just shaking them up to mix the pigment and the dye together. You'll see how it settles itself on the bottom. So you want to make sure to shake them up really, really well. And this is how I like to apply the splatter. So I take the whole sprayer out, and then I just tap till I have as many splatters as I want. Now if I happen to get any on that flower, they will wipe off. It's just much easier to have a mask on it and not need to bother doing that. Like I said, I used it for my sample, it's here somewhere. There we go. So once I have as many splatters as I want, I need to let it dry completely. There we go. And I'm going to take a tweezers to take these off. I don't want to accidentally move them and smear one of those splatters. I'm going to let that dry completely, and I'll see you back and we'll assemble the card.